and welcome to People Are Animals Too, Darn It. I'm your host, Mandy Evans, and today I am joined by Amanda Arrington, the Senior Director of the Pets for Life program with the Humane Society of the United States. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you so much for having me.
So today, it's just such a perfect topic because you represent this really wonderful movement or direction in animal welfare. So it's kind of an easy discussion. Can you, for anyone that isn't aware of Pets for Life, give an overview of what the program represents and how it actually functions?
Sure. In the simplest form, the program is working to increase equity and access to pet services for people who live in poverty or in underserved communities. And we do that in a few different ways through direct care. As a program of the HSUS, we operate Pets for Life in Philadelphia and Los Angeles with our own staff. So they are out in the communities every single day, a bit of a different way now in the COVID environment, meeting people and connecting people to resources for their pets. And then we also have a mentorship and training program where we work with local organizations around the country, mostly animal shelters, all types and sizes of animal shelters, and then animal control agencies, and then some groups that are non-sheltering, like spay-neuter clinics, community medicine clinics. And we support those local groups in how to bring a Pets for Life philosophy and approach to their organizational mission and to their community. And then we have sort of a broader scope part of the work, which is thought leadership, really taking on the role that HSUS is meant to, which is how do we create best practices and approaches and put together tools for the field in order to look at their own work and then to bring pet owner support and community outreach programming as part of that.
It's very big. It's a very big project. And you guys are now in your 10th year of this really important work. And it's interesting because for our shelter, the Panhandle Animal Shelter, we were introduced to Pets for Life back in, I think, 2015 at the New Orleans conference, HSUS conference. And I remember sitting in the crowd, and it was like being slapped in the face because we had been doing this work, or I had been in the job for 4 years. And there was always this gnawing feeling that we may not be doing it the best way possible. And then I'm sitting there and you had all these people from all these different organizations come up and talk about their stories of how they've helped animals by really hurting families and making poor decisions. And I was ready. I'm like, oh no, I've got a situation right now. And I went up to one of the people that was on the stage when it was over. And I was like, well, what about this? And then he kind of very kindly put me in my place. And it really set us on a path to treat our community as our partners rather than separate. But now all of a sudden, for anybody that might be listening, there's this huge movement in animal welfare to really look at your community as partners because we are in the middle of COVID, where shelters are having to close. Have you seen an increase in understanding or these awakenings around the Pets for Life program because of COVID?
Absolutely, and in a couple of different ways. Pets for Life has always just been one program, but we wanted the idea of Pets for Life to become commonplace in animal welfare. That was always the goal. So we would have our programmatic part of the work, but we wanted our field to be thinking in a much more justice-minded way and to be looking at their community as partners, and to think about if our work was doing justice to all pet owners. And so COVID had this weird silver lining effect. It's hard to say that when there are so many people and animals that are suffering because of COVID, both with, health concerns and economically, but it really did force animal welfare to stop and to think and to take a look at what we have been doing really well, which is a lot of stuff, but where could we improve, and where did we need to head in the future to make sure that we were a comprehensive community support and we weren't just operating within buildings of shelters, that we weren't so sort of centric on that component of intake and rehoming. And so COVID really did bring, I think, for a lot of people, an initial thought process in that. And then for other people, maybe a reawakening where, they had, like you said, had this gnawing feeling that there are, ways that we could improve our field, or there are things that we could be doing differently that made it more fair for everybody who had a pet. And COVID kind of got us in a position to hit reset in certain ways. And then to bring, I think, some new people into that thinking and kind of into the fold of, oh goodness, we are all, potentially in a position where we could struggle economically and where finances could become a barrier. And so how can we, shift some of our industry work to being more support based and making sure that we are there to keep people and pets together. So yeah, COVID's been an interesting time because there's so many challenges that have come out of it and that we're still in the middle of. But I think it's also giving us a brand new perspective that I'm really excited about.
I know, I am with you. Like, it's so hard to say that COVID is a good thing. But I think that anytime there's any moment of tragedy or pause, that we tend to be able to see the humanity in people a little bit more than we did before. And I think that that's where, on the calls that I've been on with shelters, that's what I'm seeing, is this opportunity to say, we have to trust our community more right now. We don't have a choice. And then they're seeing the response back. And the response back is so cool. And in the beginning, it was like, this is not going to be the way it is. This is going to change. People aren't really this good. Like, they're going to just surrender, and and then I think the longer it's gone on, people are really seeing that their community wants to be helpful. And what you've been saying all along is that it's really a lack of access, and really in determining that it's not good people and bad people. It's how do we get these resources to communities?
Yeah.
You've been doing a lot of DEI talks and work. Do you want to talk a little bit about kind of what you're seeing in that realm of people wanting to be just better at supporting in that realm?
Yeah, what you just said is an important point, is sort of the shift from thinking it's an individual issue and understanding it's more of a systemic issue. That whatever our challenges have been in our field, we might have relegated that to people before, to where I think we have a much more pervasive understanding that there are structural inequities that we have to acknowledge and that we have to exist. There is racial and economic inequity that is real and pervasive and that impacts people and their pets. And so it's sort of been that combination of not just COVID, but the national dialogue that's happening around racial injustice that I think have come together for this moment where we're taking a hard look at our field. And so because individuals are going through that process, organizations are sort of going through it, we've gotten a lot of requests and a lot of interest in PFL, which again is very exciting for us, for people to say, okay, we found your sustainability guide online, we want to do more. Or organizations who are maybe, working towards it, but this has pushed them, to the place of readiness. And so they're saying, what do we do first? What should we be looking at? What should we be doing within our organizations to take the next steps, or to maybe take the first steps? And thank goodness that's something we were prepared for in Pets for Life. That's been a role we take very seriously for many, many years, is that we're here to support local organizations. We're here to do some of the work that local groups don't have the bandwidth and the capability to do. And so our team was in a good place in order to respond. We might not always keep up, on a daily basis. It's been a lot, but we have worked really hard to make sure that we're there to answer the call, the email, and to get into conversations with people of, what does this look like and how do I tackle it? And because it's so, varied within organizations and within communities, when you're a very small rural shelter, you have some different things to work through than if you're a large municipal agency in a big city, but still have the same, items to think about and to kind of sift through. It just logistically can look different in every place. And so having our team with different areas of expertise has made a difference too. We have folks on our team who have operated programs themselves through PFL, so they really know that side of it. We have, folks on our team who have a history in humane law enforcement, so they have that perspective to bring. And then, we have someone on our team who used to work in racial equity and who has a real social justice focus. And so that has been super important to have, in an offering to local groups. So we've tried to be there in as many ways as we can and for as many groups as we can to really sort of take advantage of a moment in time that we have an opportunity to make some significant change.
And I just want to give you a plug that if you are a shelter organization, you're a board member with an organization, and you're looking for resources, the PFL team, they've been doing this for a long time. And you have amazing resources. Your sustainability guide is online. If people go, is there an easy web address that you can tell people where to go?
Yes, if you go to animalsheltering.org/Pets for Life, it's right there in the middle of the page with tools and guides.
Perfect. Yeah, because I have my community outreach toolkit, but I'm not going to show it because I'm not sure if it was the first one. The sustainability guide, you and I just talked about this the other day, that I've had it forever, I think, since you put it out there. And then I actually have the paper copy one, and I re-looked at it the other day, and it was like, why haven't I looked at this recently? There's so many really amazing tools, evaluating or helping your team along. Like, there's just so much in this toolkit that anyone that's wanting information, I would suggest that you look it up, because it's a gold mine. The other thing too, that something happened the other day on a call, Ed Jameson from Dallas, super nice guy. I'm going to be interviewing him next week. And he just made the most meaningful assertion, I guess, on this call, where he is a Black man who's a leader of the Dallas Animal Services. And he said, I didn't realize how much our policies and procedures were discriminating against our population in our community. And then just that, what I would call awakening, he was able to make really great strides in just saying, this isn't okay with me anymore. It was a really, and I just love the fact that he was super authentic about it, that he's been in this position a while and he just didn't know what was going on. And a lot of the things he talked about are really things that we would call open adoptions, where we're really trying to help anyone that needs to have an animal. And one of the things I think is interesting, and there's nothing bad about it, is that open adoptions is a philosophy that has been around for a while and just supporting your community. But right now it has a more racial focus, right? So, but like, I'm in a community, we have no diversity. I can be honest. And so I look at it and I think open adoptions and the philosophies that you guys share are just as important in my community with no diversity as they are in a community that has a lot.
Well, because I think there's an economic factor as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that no community is exempt from having lower income people and families who want and need pets in their life and have a lot of barriers in working to get a pet, especially through the shelter system. It's just the reality on a national scale is that you can't separate economic challenges from racial inequity. That's just in the
Right.
DNA of our country, unfortunately. And so for a lot of communities, the two overlap, and race just matters in addition to economics. So I think that the thought of adopters welcome and open adoption policies is really looking at making sure that no matter someone's background, whether that's socioeconomically, whether it's the zip code they live in, whether it's their race or ethnicity, the language that they speak, that you're looking at all of those sort of areas of consideration and making sure that you're being welcoming and that you're thinking through your policies and your approaches, not just through your lens. I think that's really the takeaway, is that you don't want to only be considering things through one limited scope, that we have to think about it in a variety of ways. And that is something that every single shelter and every single community needs to take into consideration. And then each individual community has, different demographics and sort of a different makeup, that they can kind of layer on top of that. But I think the sort of racial and economic inequities are at the core of it, and the two are interconnected in really deep ways.
And the tough part about all of this is that we're all human. We all come with our own story, our own belief systems, and whether or not we own what those belief systems are or not, they come into judgment calls that we make every day. And I find the whole PFL policy or the structure of it it's almost a journey. It's not like you just become, oh, hey, guess what? We're a PFL shelter. This is great. And all of a sudden you've just become it. Like, we discover things that we're doing or the thought processes we have on a regular basis where we're like, oh, geez, I can't believe I thought that. But it's fun. Like, you have to own a certain part of you that is not, maybe not the best side of you, I guess, and be able to decide that you're going to improve it.
Well, even within our own program and our own team, we're constantly learning as well. That's part of the commitment. If you want to have true inclusion, true diversity, and true equity, is that it is a lifelong process. It is not something that you arrive at. You're always having to seek out more information, because the more you learn, it's cliche, but the more you find out you have to learn, and so like with every sort of tidbit that you bring in, you realize, oh my goodness, now I need to go explore this other area, or there's something else for me to discover and to consider that I didn't before. So I think what you're describing is exactly what it should be, and what we should all strive to be a part of, is that we will never stop learning. And especially because the societal issues, sort of the institutional issues that we're talking about and that, we're hopefully starting to address in our field, did not happen overnight. These are things that it is centuries in the making. And so for us to think that we're going to not only kind of remedy that moving forward, but that we're going to actually start to rectify the harm that has been caused or what has happened in the past in our lifetime, it is just not feasible. I think that we can make a lot of progress, so we shouldn't be discouraged. There's a lot that we can do, but this is something that's going to take generations for us to repair.
So just so we can really just take this home, do you have any, and I'm sorry I didn't prep you for this, but do you have any really good story that you can share that provides the audience with a picture of how we might be missing out on or our judgments are holding back families from the potential of having and keeping a loving pet in their life?
There are so many, and it's one of the hardest questions to answer, because, we've served hundreds of thousands of pets now, and they're people. And so there are so many, but I don't know if it's specific to your question, but I have two answers that are in the same area. So go with me on them, and then if I need to answer it differently, you can tell me. But one service that we provide in Pets for Life that I think is one of the most important and has been meaningful to me in my professional life, and that I've seen mean something to people, is humane euthanasia. And it's a tough one to talk about, because it's not always sort of that positive and uplifting, but I think that it is, because there's an audience of pet owners who just never had that option. They don't have a veterinary relationship, can't afford the cost of euthanasia. And so we have found that for certain communities that have just not had that access, how special it is to get to make a dignified sort of decision in the end of life for your pet, where the options before were either for the pet to just, pass at home, and that could sometimes be prolonged and extremely traumatic, or to surrender to animal control or the animal shelter. And that's if you had transportation out, or maybe the animal control truck came and picked up your sick or elderly animal. And so that's just been sort of this focus for us, is that this is an area where we need to make sure everyone has equal opportunity in making that decision for their pet. But I do have one story. Do I have the time to tell one quick story?
Absolutely.
Okay. And this is, it's an intersection of sort of everything that is happening in our world right now. And so it's why I'm choosing it. This was years ago. I think it was probably in 2015 that we had someone that we had known in Pets for Life lived in a city where the Pets for Life program was in operation, and had an amazing dog named Boss Lady. And this person was walking with Boss Lady to the corner store. And on the way to the corner store, there was a case of mistaken identity by the police, and the police tasered this man. And realized that, it wasn't the right person, but he had to be taken to the hospital. So when he was taken to the hospital, his dog was there with him. And so animal control was called to come and pick up the dog. So the dog went to the shelter, the man went to the hospital. When it was all worked out, and the man was released from the hospital, he wasn't given information on where his dog was. And so there was a lot of confusion and a lot of anxiety around it. Finally found out that his dog was at the shelter, went to the shelter to get his dog back, and there were reclaim fees. And in this community, the reclaim fees were written into the ordinance. And so the shelter said that they did not have the capability to waive those fees because they were mandatory, regardless of what the reason was. Thank goodness Pets for Life was able to cover the cost of those fees. So this man and his dog could be reunited and remain, a unit, and to have that bond. But it was just like at every point, you could see how our system is broken, and not just within animal welfare, but more broadly, but how that impacts animal welfare, and why in animal welfare we need to be concerned with, and we need to be informed on these larger institutional issues that tens of millions of people face every single day, and then it trickles down to their pet. And then even within our field, there were obvious issues there that we needed to look at, and we need to start to address systemically, so that, someone who doesn't have Pets for Life as a facilitator or a liaison wouldn't end up with a very different outcome. And so that story just encapsulates so much of what the conversation in animal welfare is right now, and what I think we need to sort of keep in our discussion, and how we have an opportunity again to just make changes within our own field, but to also contribute to broader change.
So I've heard this story before, and actually it was the story that I was going to say, hey, you remember that? And I didn't want to do that to you. But I think one of the things that strikes me, like in my gut, is if that happened to me, I would sue them. Like I would go to the mayor, and I would do this. But I think that point of view is coming from a privileged point of view, a point of view that says, I could afford it, or I would have access. And for that man, because it was wrong that he, the whole thing was wrong. It's kind of shocking that stuff even happens. And speaking of privilege, that when you told the euthanasia and offering humane euthanasia, I think that, again, coming from a place of privilege, we forget that the simplest thing isn't so simple to everyone. And I love that. So I have to be honest, one of my favorite Pets for Life stories, and I tell it to people whenever I have the opportunity to talk, is the story about, I think it came out of Charleston, where the older lady had the dog with mange, and I don't remember who told the story, but it was whoever did had a good sense of humor, because the saying that the dog was really not very nice. And if the dog had come to the shelter, it would have been euthanized. And didn't he come back? I mean, I should probably just let you tell the story, but do you want to tell the story? It's a good one.
The dog his name is Rich. And I'm sure that Aldwin Roman, who oversees the PFL program and started with the PFL program with Charleston Animal Society, he tells the story, but we also tell the story also because it's again another sort of wonderful example of a shift in thinking and having a different approach, because I will try not to speak for Aldwin, but you've heard him tell the story, and so I think I'll do it justice that his background was in animal cruelty investigations. And so when he started with the PFL program, that was a lot of conversation for us, around that. It's like, well, what if, and when we encountered this situation? And so when that happened, and Rich was not in good condition at all. There was not like one hair on Rich's body. All the hair was gone from having mange, but then there were also secondary skin infections and all kinds of issues. And Aldwin, said where his mind went to is that this is an easy case. Like, this is obvious neglect. Not only can I remove this animal from the home, but I could charge the person for failure to provide veterinary care. The law would support that. And we talked through that situation quite a few times, like to sort of get, to a place where Aldwin felt comfortable and like, this is let's try this different way of addressing the situation. And so instead of intaking Rich when he was not a friendly dog, he very much loved his person, but he also was protective of his person and had only ever known this person. Rich was 12 years old. He had never been in another home. And so I don't think that it would have been fair to Rich, or if Rich could have chosen like what he would have wanted to say, let's take you from the only home you've ever known, put you in a high stress shelter environment where we're going to provide either the same medical treatment or you would be euthanized. Why don't we just provide that medical treatment in the home? And so that's what we did. And, it was a months-long process in getting Rich back healthy. And I wish that we had like the before and after pictures that your listening audience could see, because they're pretty remarkable. But it is one of those situations where when you just see that before picture, it is something we're conditioned to do, I think, in animal welfare, is to assume that person doesn't care. Whoever's attached to that animal had to have bad intentions or just, didn't have any concern at all for the animal's well-being. And it couldn't be further from the truth. The person loved Rich immensely. And because of the service provision and the support that was given, there was a real relationship and a bond that was created between Aldwin and the PFL program and Rich's person that lasted until that woman passed away a few years later. And to the point where when she had a medical crisis and the EMTs came and she was taken in an ambulance, she gave them the Pets for Life business card when she got into the ambulance and said, please call them and make sure that they take care of Rich. And so like even her moment of crisis, that was her first thought, and that she trusted that team. And so it's been the story isn't unique. There are so many Riches. There are so many, people like Rich's person that we can really work on building trust and relationships and not creating a divide, and doing what we think in PFL is the right thing by the animal in the end too.
So I think that I'm hoping that all of this change that has been happening in our world, there'll be enlightenment, I guess, because I think that we forever have really been focused on the short game. You take the animal away and you get it away from the owner and everything's going to be okay. And really that method of trying to change behavior and trying to change the environment to what we ultimately want, which is a better world for animals. And I was going to say and people, but that hasn't necessarily been the focus. That it's the game, it's a long game approach. It's the influence. And when we deploy these short-term things that are basically, they're in fear, that's like they're based in fear, we really aren't building these connections and these relationships. And one of the beautiful parts of Pets for Life is that you tell us, like, yeah, you may not like what's going on, but if you go in and you just do this quick action, you're going to ruin your relationship and your influence. Accept where the animal is at right now, where the person's at, and then build that relationship with them. And over time, you start to see this beautiful relationship happening. And I think a lot of us, I know I'm this way, that I didn't realize the power of community. Like going in and working with one community member and building a solid rapport can really be like the angel, the grace of your entire program. You have them, what are they called? Like ambassadors or?
Ambassadors, yeah. And I propose that actually that approach is more sustainable. So it's not just a short, long, game. I think that that's part of it. But I think repeating the same behavior is not sustainable. Where if we start to actually create equity, we actually build trust, that long term, that puts us in a much better position that we can sustain in animal welfare. And it's there. A lot of people will ask the question when they find out about the work, less and less. So there's some evolution happening there. But people will say, like, how do you deal with that? Like, it's got to be so hard to see, animals and some people in conditions, that are less than ideal. And so, how do you sort of process that and work through it? And really, I think you can speak to this. The opposite is true, that the more you get to know your community, the more you're building those community relationships, it restores like your belief in humanity. It's the exact opposite of what people think, is that you actually start to see so much good, and you see how much people are doing when there is sort of little financial means, and how much effort people make, and how many animals are in perfect condition that you might not have assumed were there, or that you wouldn't have the opportunity to see if you weren't looking, and if you weren't showing up, and if you weren't creating a community presence. And so I always tell people that it's really different from what you might assume, and that if you give it a chance, if you just sort of open your heart and mind, you end up really believing in people in a whole new way.
Yeah, compassion fatigue is I might be saying this wrong, but it's the act of basically you give your all, you're doing it, and you never see any results from it. And so I think that when we do that, like fear-based, transaction-based, I'm taking your animal away, you get compassion fatigue because you're constantly looking at people as bad. And then you, because of the way that it's like your lens of the way you're looking at the world never changes.
Yeah.
Then when you look at it from a more open and optimistic mindset, when you get to know people, when you close the empathy gap by actually talking to people, all of a sudden your world opens up and you see these beautiful people. I went to this woman's house, and she took me around to her garden, and her garden was like brilliant. It was beautiful. And I know in my head, I kept thinking, how does she afford this? Like this is a lot of money. Like all of these flowers, roses, I mean, everything. And I didn't ask her. She went through and she could tell me every single place that she had done a trimming off of a public, like a rose bush or something, and that she had planted it, and the way that she was doing composting and things to make her soil, prosperous for these flowers. I was so impressed at just the love and care that this woman had put into this beautiful garden. It was, and she had animals, and she loved her animals, but it was a really meaningful, meaningful
sort
experience.
of a great metaphor is that she took these positive parts and pieces from around her community, and she gave that love and attention and nourishment, and then it bloomed. Like, we're going to get a little too corny and cheesy here, but I mean, I think that is a metaphor for life, of that if we really we're asset focused. This is sort of a social work lesson that I was given, to be asset focused and not deficit focused, to see that good. Then you're able to nurture that, and you're able to contribute positively to help that grow.
Yeah, and something that you told me early on, again, that community aspect, when we were out doing the work, I swear to you, every neighbor came over And it was to see, there was someone that we were visiting that had recently had surgery. They didn't know we were there or anything like that. This is just a natural thing for people to come over. And then our Pets for Life person, Kendra, you know, and she's like, oh, hey, and conversations. This was pre-COVID. It was like having a block party with these really amazing people that I can pretty confidently say that I might not have ever engaged or had a relationship with before. So absolutely, more meaningful work, leaning in, understanding the situation, finding out and acknowledging your thoughts and what you're perceiving it changes your life. It changes the world. So I think you're changing the world, Amanda.
I think that, you know, our team and everybody who has like contributed and participated in some way, that is what I hope we've sort of built together. Because I believe the same, that this is something that can change the world, because I think that animals can bring us together in a really special way and be this reminder that we are all human, and help us see those areas where we connect and not necessarily, you know, where there are these either perceived differences or these, you know, differences that are sort of thrust upon us oftentimes. So I'm with you. Like, I believe that this really is the path to a whole different world moving forward.
And I think it's kind of a safe place right now, because the expectations of any business are really, people just don't know what to expect anymore, right? Like if you're a restaurant and you have to be closed certain hours, there's a little bit more forgiveness than if we were in normal situations. So right now it's kind of a perfect opportunity for shelters, rescues that are out there and want to consider making some pretty significant changes and looking at their community in a different way, trying new things. Right now is a brilliant time to do it. The community and your supporters, donors are going to be probably more forgiving than they would have been in months past. I was going to say in years past.
And I think that there's more need right now too. So it is the right time in so many ways, because while we're talking about all the positives, I don't want to diminish just how real the struggles are that people are facing and that exist, and just how devastating, you know, that lack of access has been and currently is and is going to continue to be. You know, it's life altering in a negative way for so many people. And so for us to dedicate ourselves as a field to being there for people and to seeing, identifying and removing barriers, like there couldn't be, I think, a more valuable commitment for us to make, and for COVID to really sort of push us into that as just a way of existence and not just a piece, you know, not just kind of one program or like this is over here going to be something that we do temporarily, but really seeing, okay, this is foundational to our work, and it has to be woven into every part of our identity.
Yeah, and HABRI, Human Animal Bond Institute, is that right? Human Animal Research. Anyway, I'll put the link in the podcast. But they've got great studies that show you what the human-animal bond is and the benefits of it. And so for people who are struggling on, you know, there are no animals in the shelter, and how do we explain that to our community, and how do we work with our donors? The opportunity right now to share your broader work in providing food, in keeping animals in their homes, it's so important and relevant. And we are going to see, I'm assuming, some evictions and being able to possibly put money aside to help people with pet deposits, temporarily housing while people are looking for new homes. All of those things are things that we need to be considering, because they're going to be affecting a lot of people if they aren't already.
Yep. And for a long time to come. I think that the economic recovery is not going to be anytime soon. And I think the housing crisis that already existed all across the country in so many communities is going to be elevated and escalated in a way that it's hard to digest and to think about. And so I hope that organizations are preparing themselves, but also their donors for that, is that, you know, there's a lot to be said for reallocating your funds to support and keeping people and pets together versus spending the money on the back end. And it really is just a shift in the way that we think. And what we have to sort of push out of the way in order to get to that place is the judgment. Like, that's what's kept us from that, I think, for so long, is saying, if we're going to spend this amount of money, we can either spend it on the front end, we can spend it in prevention, or we can spend it on the back end and spend it being reactive. What has kept us from making that change? And it really has been this idea of who was deserving of that support and who wasn't, and who we believed was a good enough home for an animal and who wasn't. And so if we can, kind of get across that line and understand, and I think that again is where COVID maybe is bringing a little bit more understanding and helping people get there, then we will hopefully respond in a appropriate way to what we're going to be seeing, I think, in the coming months and the coming years because of COVID.
Yeah, and the conversation has to change. So it happens a lot because we have the home-to-home program, and we'll talk at conferences, and I always get the question, but we need animals in, like, if you use home-to-home and you're trusting people to rehome on their own, those are all the good dogs, and the bad dogs are in the shelter. And this idea that we judge our worth or judge the work of helping animals by having them in cages is so weird to me. But it used to be the way I thought. Like, I just am putting that out there so that we can really take the time. So when you are talking to a donor, you can say, like, shouldn't our job be in the realm of preventative, rather than thinking that everybody is bad when we know that they aren't, and we don't want to be judged on the number of animals in our shelter. It just shouldn't be the way that we have for ages. And this is what I'm talking to Ed Stevenson about, is this idea that municipalities are funded through animals in cages, and how do we change that conversation, and so shelters can work with their municipalities to say, no, we really should be in the prevention world, not in the sheltering world. Well, Amanda, do you have? Yeah, it's huge. And so I'm like Pollyanna, like this optimist. But I do know that in my darkest days, when I'm really sad and I feel like things are so hard, I just want to hide in I call it my cave. So I don't have a cave. I wouldn't mind a cave, because when things feel hard, I just want to escape. But I always tell myself that whenever things are really bad, it's because we're about to get a lot better. And when we have COVID and the Black Lives Matter and even the housing crisis, like, I think people just sweep that under the rug. And right now it's going to become very apparent. It's going to become, in everyone's face, like news. There's going to be tons of stories about it. And that is how we get the change we need. So I'm hopeful that as a collective animal welfare industry, that we can continue on this really positive path that will help us get to a brighter and better tomorrow. It's the only way I can think, because the alternative would be depressing.
Well, I think it is a very useful way to think, and I don't think that it's untrue. It's just unfortunate that is the reality, though, sometimes, is that you have to be faced with such significant just sadness and sort of overwhelming need in order for us to actually find the right solutions and to be willing to try out something different and not just sort of accept the status quo. But you're true. And I don't think that that's even specific to animal welfare. I think that that's in a lot of ways. Yeah. And so if we accept that, then yes, I think that we really are at this turning point within our field of that we're seeing things in a whole new way. And that this is going to, again, in the long run, that we're going to change for the better, and making sure that we not only are there to support people and their pets, but that we actually extend our compassion to humans and not just to the animals.
Yeah. And the more we demonstrate compassion, I think that we have the opportunity to change someone's day every day for the better. And that only will have positive effects on our community. Okay, so we are wrapping up. Before we wrap up, I wanted to see what books. I know that you always have a great list of books and want to give people resources on books. And we already talked about the Pets for Life website that has a tremendous amount of information. I will, let's see, well, you have, if people need to reach out to you, that you have, can they reach out to you through the website?
I don't think that my email address is on the website, but I'm happy to share it for people to reach out. Is it better to say it, or do you post it? What is the?
I'll post it just so people have it. And I say that because you have a collection of webinars that you have been a part of that are extremely helpful. I know we are showing our whole team your webinars to bring a greater level of understanding, and I want people to have access to that. So if you don't mind, I'll put your email in there. Okay, so tell us about what books people should be reading to bring more awareness.
Okay, so there are a couple that have gotten a lot of attention lately, and I'm so pleased about that. At the top of the list, because we are predominantly white field, we are made up of predominantly white women in animal welfare. The book White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo is just a priority, and I think should be mandatory reading. It has been so helpful to me in sort of deepening my understanding and identifying my own thought process and sort of behavior, but also in working with mostly other white people in our movement has helped me in how to really sort of come up with ways to talk about and to address, certain collective behavior in our field. So that's number one. How to Be an Anti-Racist is another one by Ibram X. Kendi that I think is tremendous. And then I'm going to share one, but it's actually right here. And I didn't even know you were going to ask this, so I'm so glad that it's right here because I'm only about halfway through it. It's a brand new book that I just started. And it's still a bit of a controversial conversation, but I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to share it. It's called From Here to Equality, and it's by William A. Darity Jr. and A. Kirsten Mullen. I'm even going to hold it up. And it is about reparations for Black Americans in the 21st century. And it really talks about it in a very modern way and in a way that most people don't think about when that word is used. I know there's a lot of connotation with that word and there's a lot of reaction from people around it. But it's so well done, and it will surprise you if you want to read it and you're willing to. I think you'll think of that term and just the idea in a whole different way, and something that is a really necessary conversation for us to have in the U.S. So those are my three
Excellent.
books.
So we're, as a team, we had to wait because White Fragility has been on back order forever. But I have an idea for you, and as you know, I am full of ideas, and they may not be great, but I think you should host a monthly book club where people read. Yeah, do a Zoom. You could have 250, 500 people on, and you'd probably even get the author, I bet, to join if it's that many people.
I mean, if that's the case, and I'm going to add another book to my list because there's an author that I would love, which is Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. It's an amazing book too, but I will say, even if you don't have time to read that book, if you go to equaljusticeinitiative.org or EJI.org, there's a link to it. I'm trying to think of the backslash and the vanity URL, and I can't right now. But there's this whole interactive website on the history of racial violence and lynching in America that, again, I think is mandatory sort of consumption of information. And so it's a great resource too. But Bryan Stephenson is the founder of Equal Justice Initiative. His book, Just Mercy, is amazing, and there's a movie made on it, but they do so much more than just that. So that I'm going to get that little plug in too.
Awesome. Okay, so anybody that's listening or watching, I want you to do the peer pressure technique and email Amanda or put it in the comments that you want her to do a book club. And I think it'd be kind of fun. And then we'll make sure it happens.
Okay. as long as we can do it like in the evening, we'll have to figure out for time zones so we can have like a glass of wine, because that goes with book club, right? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and men are invited.
Of course, everyone. Yes.
This would be different for book club, I think.
Yeah, it could be interesting though. I'm not opposed to it.
And there's an entire book club resource guide on white fragility.
Yes, there's a great reading guide that is free online. So when you do get that book, if you want to use that just sort of in conversations and questions and exercises, it's really good.
Awesome. All right. Well, Amanda, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today, and also to be kind of a beacon, I think, of hope and a visionary on trying to get all of us on the same path. And I know that I drank the Kool-Aid and I've never been happier. I really appreciate all the work that you and your team do, and think that each of you is absolutely fantastic. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And the team is fantastic, but all of you who are doing the important and necessary work in your own communities around the country are amazing, and we are grateful for you.
Thank you. All right. Concludes our podcast. People are animals too, darn it.